Today we're going to have a look at the mineral resources in Europe. In the past 3 paragraphs we have looked at the development of these resources, how were they formed, where can we find them, how do they look, and today we're going to look at these resources in our neighborhood, so to say. Which ones are available in Europe and how are they used? So we are going to look at how these resources which are available in Europe are mineable, why the Dutch shaft mines are closed, which European countries still have an active mine industry, what mining areas are important or were important in the past, what critical resources are, and if there are any alternatives for natural resources which could get extinct in the upcoming 50 years. Well, first of all, we look at this map, which is in your book as well, and this map shows you the most important resources in Europe. And the most important resources in the past were coal and iron ore. Coal was of course used in the factories to create energy, and that started around the year 1750, so that means at the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom, and later it spread across Europe. So that means that from the, say 19th century onwards, from 1800 until about 1960, 1965, coal was used a lot in the industry. On the other hand, iron ore is of course important for everything that's been made and still is in production. I mean, if you're going to our own industry in the Netherlands, you might know that we do have Tata Steel, which is an Indian company which has a factory in IJmuiden. These factories existed all along Europe, but of course due to the price and the cost of these productions in our country or in Europe, they decided to close them down. But Tata Steel bought the manufacturing facility in IJmuiden from the Dutch state, which meant that it still exists and is one of the leading steel manufacturers in Europe nowadays. Of course, the Industrial Revolution was actually based upon these mineral resources, and with these mineral resources available, the region where the coal was mined and the iron ore was made into metal had a high prosperity, because there was a lot of money engaged in the production and the transport of the material. And there were several regions in Europe which were important, like the Ruhrgebiet, which is in Germany, just across the border of the Netherlands, and there was a lot of coal, and there is still, but of course these mines are closed as well, and there's a reason for that. At a certain point in time, it became way too expensive to mine the coal in Europe. And the reason for that was that there were countries in Asia which proved that they could mine it cheaper. So after the rise of these low-income countries, most coal mines in Europe were closed. And of course the reason for that was because, it was cheaper to mine the coal and produce even the iron ore in Asia and transport it to our country than to mine it here. And there is a video in this presentation which you can look up if you look at the presentation itself, but I can't show it to you in this recording. And this is a video which shows the closing of the last state-run mines in the Netherlands. They were closed in 1974. So in 1974, the Dutch government decided to close the state-run mines and start with importing coal from Asia. He says it's there, but I can't start it. In Europe, there are some mines still open, and there are countries which profit from their mines, and that is, for example, the Czech Republic, Poland and Romania. They still have shaft mines in which people get down into the crust of our planet and mine coal or other mineral resources which could be important for them. And of course Germany, which has open cast mines, which I showed you before, for the extraction of lignite, which is brown coal, or the book calls it brown coal, but that's not a correct translation, it's lignite. On the picture you see one of those big, that was my cat, you see one of those open cast mines which create a big dent in the surface of the earth. If you look again at this map, you will notice that there are two red ovals on this picture. I draw them because these areas are important. The UK and Norway have big reserves of crude oil and natural gas. That means that these regions are capable of mining them, which they do. And of course this is another way of mining than we were talking about mining coal. And of course you see that these natural reserves are pretty much needed nowadays because they are used to produce electricity in power plants. But there's something else. Iron ore is mineable in Sweden, and these mines of course are still open, and it's one of the key components of their economy. So they are still mining it, and there's a reason for that. First, because of the fact that we do need the iron ore, but secondly, because of the fact that Sweden is less dense populated, which means there's space enough to mine the iron ore. And of course, if you look at the map, you might notice that there aren't many locations in Western Europe with the iron ore. So that is a reason as well that they decided to mine it there. And of course, if the quality of those mines is pretty good, so that the quality of the steel is in good order, they of course are able to sell it against a higher price. So that means that they can control the quality of the material they're producing. So of course that is important as well. And now we're going to have a look at critical resources. And critical resources are mineral resources which are not readily available in the European Union. That does mean that they are rare here, but not in other countries. But we need them, and we prevent shortage by the input from other countries. And if you look at the diagram on the right, you might notice that there are some countries on this diagram which are in fact European, like Finland, Norway and France. But you see that there are lots of other countries like Nigeria, that's what I wanted to tell you, which are far away. And that means that we rely on them to get these mineral resources which are rare in Europe to Europe. And to do that, every few years the European Union creates a list with the critical resources on it. And they do that because they want to get clear which is important for us at a certain point in time. Because of the energy transition, it could happen that certain mineral resources aren't that important anymore and we need others. So we could change the list and create a new one which shows us exactly what we need at a certain point in time. But why are these resources critical? I just said that they are not rare, but they are rare in the European Union, so we rely on other countries to get them over here. And they are important for the European economy, so that is very important for us. It's all about the money. But there's a slight problem, because importing them is not without risk. I mean, if there's a risk, a war in a country which does have a lot of a certain mineral, it means that there's a chance that the export from that country to us, the import, of course, is not possible. And you might have noticed on the diagram that Russia is still 8% of the main suppliers for critical minerals to the European Union. And of course, nowadays, because of the war in Ukraine, I think that that amount has well, decreased enormously, because, well, we are not allowed, of course, to import anything from Russia anymore. And you might wonder why these critical resources are important for the European economy. Well, almost all countries use them in their industry, and of course they are used in modern technology. And if you look at Europe, we are a part of that modern technology, so we need those mineral resources, those critical resources, to be able to actually create our products. And they are of great importance for energy efficient applications. When we're talking about the energy transition, if you look at solar panels, they contain critical resources which are not available here. So we have to import all the critical resources from China, or import the whole solar panel, which happens, of course, 62% of the time, which you see on this diagram. So we need them, and we rely on other countries to get them over here. And that is a problem, because those countries can easily say, well, I'm going to make the price a little bit higher because I think you can pay that. Well, and then you see what happens. Things get even more expensive than they are already nowadays. And then there's the last one. Are there alternatives for the natural resources? If you want to be able to do it yourself, and you're not relying on anyone else, you have to decide to look for an alternative, which means, can we reuse things that are already here? And then we have to start with recycling. Reuse, like building materials, which we can do quite easy. Concrete can be reused, but most of the time we don't. Home equipment, like second-hand things. Many people don't like it using second-hand products, but when they are as good as new, why shouldn't we? We could even replace everyday objects with a better design, for which we don't need that much resources, or they consist of recycled materials. What we can do as well, of course, is use products which are interchangeable, like plastics. You have to hand them in nowadays because they can be used again. And if you're looking at these pictures, the house on the pictures was built out of recycled materials, and it was built out of recycled plastic. Why not? But bricks can be used, of course, again, and wood. If you're tearing down a building which contains wood which is not reusable in a new building, you can just create biomass out of it. So then you are actually burning the wood in your stove to gain heat. It's a fuel, and then we don't need gas anymore. So there are options enough, but we have to think out of the box and change our opinion on using, well, materials which we did not use before. And why not? It can be done. And of course, I don't ask you to use alternatives all the time, but you can think of it. How can I change my habits into more environmental friendly forms of habits? And most of the time it's pretty easy. We can. But it needs to be implemented in a country and, of course, in the European Union. Well, this was everything I wanted to tell you about the critical resources in the European Union. And if you have any questions, of course, you are allowed to ask me them.